to Tampa. I am happy to welcome two fellow journalists to this stage. Happy to be joined now by our partners in this debate, in fact, the Tampa Bay Times and National Journal. Adam Smith is the longtime political editor at the Tampa Bay Times, covering national, state, and local politics for more than a decade. One of the very best in the trade, and besides, a lot of people just thought a GOP debate should have Adam Smith present. Beth Reinhardt is a political correspondent for National Journal. She is a Florida native, was a veteran political reporter at the Miami Herald for 11 years. But one piece of business, Senator Santorum, I had to go to a break. I didn't get you in on what we'll call the Iran round, because you've talked about this a lot, specifically as a last resort, as you said, taking out Iran's nuclear program. The problem with that, so many in the military tell you, is the target list. Where do you limit it? The airstrikes that some estimate would begin at 30 to 60 days sustained, taking out air defenses, all of that familiar language that the American people have just been through for a decade.
Well, the contrast with that is what happens if Iran gets a nuclear weapon and the entire world changes. Iran is not just another country or a little small country, as President Obama classically said during the campaign. Obama's Iran policy has been a colossal failure. It's been a failure because he's not been true to the American public about the threat that Iran poses to the world, not just to Israel, but to the world and to the United States. Bottom line is, the theocracy that runs Iran is the equivalent of having al-Qaeda in charge of a country with huge oil reserves, gas reserves, and a nuclear weapon. That is something that no president could possibly allow to have happen under any circumstances. And when you ask the question, Brian, is this an act of war? Well, let's look at the acts of war that Iran, they are holding hostages. They are attacking our troops. The IEDs, the improvised explosive devices that are killing our troops in Afghanistan and killed them in Iraq and maimed so many, were produced, and people were trained and funded in Iran specifically to kill American troops. You look at the ships that have been attacked by Iran. Embassies were attacked by Iran. Iran has plotted to kill the Saudi ambassador here in this country. It is a long list of attacks, of warlike behavior on the part of this regime. And to believe that if they have a nuclear weapon, they're somehow going to become into the community of nations is a reckless act on the part of a president. It would be reckless not to do something to stop them from getting this nuclear weapon.
Senator, thank you. And to interests of local state politics, Beth Reinhardt will take over the question.
Senator Santorum, here in Florida, BP is still airing apologetic appeals on television, but there are proposals to expand offshore oil drilling. The state's most optimistic estimates say more drilling would create 5,000 jobs. But an oil spill would threaten Florida's tourism industry, which employs nearly 1 million people. Is that worth the risk?
What threatens the tourist industry in Florida, as we've seen, is a very bad economy. And a very bad economy that became a bad economy. Why? Because of a huge spike in oil prices in the summer of 2008. So energy is absolutely key to keep all of our country healthy, specifically Florida, which is a destination place. This is a place that relies upon people being able to travel and afford to be able to travel to come down here. Relies upon an economy being strong. I was at a manufacturer in Sarasota County today and was talking about them as a manufacturer, and that, you know, the importance of manufacturing jobs. Yes, even here in the state of Florida, and the price of energy for them to be able to be competitive. It is absolutely essential that we have as much domestic supply of oil, that we build the Keystone Pipeline, that we create the jobs that would create, and provide oil from domestic sources. Pipelines that run on the floor of the sea, or pipelines that come through America, are the safest way to transport oil. It is tankers that cause much more problems. Pipelines are the safe way. Building those rigs, piping that oil into our shore is the best way to create a good economy for the state of Florida.
All of you favor making English the official language of the United States, which could mean that ballots and other government documents would not be available in Spanish. But Speaker Gingrich, you're sending out press releases in Spanish. Governor Romney, you're advertising in Spanish. Why is it okay for you to court voters in Spanish, but not okay for the government to serve them in Spanish? Speaker Gingrich?
Well, first of all, you immediately jumped down to a very important language, but not the only language. The challenge to the United States is simple. There are 86 languages in Miami-Dade College. 86. There are over 200 languages spoken in Chicago. Now, how do you unify the country? What is the common bond that enables people to be both citizens and to rise commercially and have a better life and a greater opportunity? I think campaigning, historically, you've always been willing to go to people on their terms in their culture, whether it's Greek Independence Day or something you did for the Irish on St. Patrick's Day. And I'm perfectly happy to be on Radio Mombi, and I'm perfectly happy to have a lot of support in the Hispanic community. But as a country, to unify ourselves in a future in which there may well be 300 or 400 languages spoken in the United States, I think it is essential to have a central language that we expect people to learn and to be able to communicate with each other in.
So to be clear, you would only have ballots in English?
I would have ballots in English, and I think you could have programs where virtually everybody would be able to read the ballots.
Governor Romney, can you take that question?
I think Speaker Gingrich is right with regards to what he's described. I'd note that in my state, we had a tradition of teaching people in the language of their birth. And so we had in our school systems people being taught in a whole range of languages. And when we had to have teachers that could teach in Cambodian and Vietnamese and other languages, and our kids were being taught in foreign languages in our own schools. And we found at the end of their education experience, they couldn't all speak English well. It made absolutely no sense. And so we campaigned for English immersion in our schools and said kids coming in will have a transition period, then we're going to teach them in English. Look, English is the language of this nation. People need to learn English to be able to be successful, to get great jobs. We don't want to have people limited in their capacity to achieve the American dream because they don't speak English. And so encouraging people through every means possible to learn the language of America is a good idea. Recognize at the same time, we want people coming here from other cultures that speak other languages. That strengthens America. It's a great thing. But having them learn English is also a great thing for them and for their kids.
May I take that?
Congressman Paul.
Yeah, my answer is similar, but a little bit different, because at the national level, obviously, we have to have one language. I mean, we can't have multiple languages, so for legal reasons, we would have one language. But our system really gives us a way to be more generous, because if Florida wanted to have some ballots in Spanish, I certainly wouldn't support a federal law that would prohibit Florida from accommodating, you know, a city election or a local election or a state election. I think that's the magnificence of our system, where you can solve some of these problems without dictating one answer for all states. But nationally, we should have one language.
Speaker Gingrich, I wanted to move on to a slightly different topic, the DREAM Act, which, as you know, would provide a pathway to citizenship for children who have been brought to the U.S. illegally if they attend college or enroll in the military. Now, Governor Romney and Senator Santorum have both said they would veto this legislation. Would you do the same?
No, I would work to get a signable version, which would be the military component. I think any young person living in the United States who happened to have been brought here by their parents when they were very young should have the same opportunity to join the American military and earn citizenship, which they would have had from back home. We have a clear provision that if you live in a foreign country and you're prepared to join the American military, you can, in fact, earn the right to citizenship by serving the United States and taking real risk on behalf of the United States. I would have that part of the DREAM Act I would support. I would not support the part that simply says everybody who goes to college is automatically waived for having broken the law.
Questioning continues.
I just note that's the same position that I have, and that is that I would not sign the DREAM Act as it currently exists, but I would sign a DREAM Act if it were focused on military service.
Thank you, Governor. Questioning continues with Adam Smith.
Let's stay on immigration for a second. Governor Romney, there's one thing I'm confused about. You say you don't want to go and round up people and deport them, but you also say that they would have to go back to their home countries and then apply for citizenship. So if you don't deport them, how do you send them home?
Well, the answer is self-deportation, which is people decide that they can do better by going home because they can't find work here because they don't have legal documentation to allow them to work here. And so we're not going to round people up. The way that we have in this society is to say, look, people who've come here illegally would, under my plan, be given a transition period and the opportunity during that transition period to work here. But when that transition period was over, they would no longer have the documentation to allow them to work in this country. At that point, They can decide whether to remain or whether to return home and to apply for legal residency in the United States, get in line with everybody else. And I know people think, but that's not fair to those that have come here illegally.
Isn't that what we have now? If somebody doesn't feel they have the opportunity in America, they can go back anytime they want to.
Yes, we'd have a card that indicates who's here legally, and if people are not able to have a card and have that through an e-verify system determine that they are here legally, then they're going to find they can't get work here. And if people don't get work here, they're going to self-deport to a place where they can get work. Ultimately, with this transition period in place, we would then allow people to get in line at home and to come back to this country after they've reached the front of the line. But I just don't think it's fair to the people who have loved ones waiting in line legally to come to America and say, guess what? We're going to encourage a wave of illegal immigration again by giving amnesty of some kind to those that have come here illegally.
Senator Santorum, self-deportation, is that a valid concept?
Well, it's happening now. I mean, people are going back now. Because they can't find jobs because of the lack of employment opportunities. The bottom line is that if you do enforce the law and say that people who are here illegally, who are doing illegal acts, and that is working, which you're not allowed to do, and if you're working, probably you've stolen someone's Social Security number, which you're not allowed to do, that's another law that is broken, that we should enforce the law. It's not someone who's come here illegally in the first place. They've only broken the law once. They continually break the law in this country, and I don't think that's something that should be rewarded. Our country, my father came to this country, my grandfather came to this country. He left my dad behind for 5 years. My dad was out without a dad for almost the first 5 years of his life. And there are millions of stories across America of people making sacrifices because America was worth it to do it the right way. You come to this country and the first thing you do is to respect our laws. To respect, if you want to be an American, you respect the laws of America. And you do so continually while you're here. We reward that kind of behavior. We don't reward behavior of where you don't respect our laws in your initial act and then you continually break the laws in order to stay here.
Speaker Gingrich, in Iowa, you were a big supporter of ethanol subsidies. Here in Florida, sugar is a very important industry, and it's subsidized as well with import restrictions, quotas. There's a conservative movement to do away with these programs. In the case of sugar, critics say it adds billions of dollars to consumers' grocery bills every year. What would you do about that?
Well, I pretty enthusiastically early in my career kept trying to figure out how to get away from the sugar subsidy. And I found out one of the fascinating things about America, which was that cane sugar hides behind beet sugar. And there are just too many beet sugar districts in the United States. It's an amazing side story about how interest groups operate. In an ideal world, you would have an open market. And I think that would be a better future, and frankly one where cane sugar would still make a lot of money. But it's very hard to imagine how you're going to get there. I spent a lot of time trying to reform agriculture when I was Speaker, and I would say it was one of the 2 or 3 hardest things to try to do because the capacity of the agricultural groups to defend themselves is pretty amazing.
Governor Romney, you're getting some campaign support from sugar growers. It's a very influential group in this state. What's your view on the sugar subsidies?
Yeah, my view is we ought to get rid of subsidies and let markets work properly. But let's step back for a second and talk about what's really going on in Florida right now. And you both know what's going on here. I spent time this morning with 8 different individuals, listening to them talk about their circumstances. There are a lot of people in Florida that are hurting. You got a lot of homes underwater. This president came into office saying he'd turn this economy around, and everything he has done has made it harder for the people of Florida. We have 25 million Americans out of work. We have, in Florida, 9.9% unemployed. We have 18% of our people in this state that are underemployed. Home values, 40% are underwater. This president has failed miserably the people of Florida. His plans for NASA, he has no plans for NASA. The Space Coast is struggling. This president has failed the people of Florida. We have to have a president who understands how to get an economy going again. He does not. He plays 90 rounds of golf when you have 25 million people out of work. He says gasoline prices doubled during his presidency. He says don't build a Keystone pipeline. We have $15 trillion of debt. We're headed to a Greece-type collapse. And he adds another trillion on top for Obamacare and for his stimulus plan that didn't create private sector jobs. This president has failed, and this economy needs a president who understands this economy.
Florida's Everglades provide 1 in 3 Floridians with their drinking water. It affects thousands of jobs. Right now, there's a joint federal-state program to save what's left of the Everglades. Would you commit to continuing that federal financing of the Everglades preservation?
Sure. I don't see any reason to go. After that, I would still look into the details on whether that could be a state issue or not. But with all the wars going on and the economy is in shambles as it is and the unemployment, to worry about dealing with that program, we could do it in a theoretical sense, but I would see no reason to, complicate things, but I wouldn't have any desire to interfere with that.
At this point, we'll take another break. We'll return from Tampa with this line of questioning right after this.